So good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern to try and figure out the future of smart buildings. The panelists here are listed on mondaylive.org if you want to know who we are. A reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any organization or company. Please do post questions and comments on the chat and Q&A that we have in Zoom. And if you can complete the survey at the end of the webinar, that'd be great. This deck that we have with some links and stuff is available also on mondaylive.org. So just as a reminder, our topic for this whole month of March is sustainability. So we are on the 29th of March. So this is the last opportunity we're going to get to talk about this. Agenda, we'll do our normal chit chat for 10 minutes or so. And then we really sort of going to take this week to talk about sort of almost like starting to recap about what we've learned about sustainability and smart buildings. We do have a guest, Casey Talon, and I'll bring you on in about 10 minutes, Casey. So slides, this is Ken's slide talking about adaptation for the month of April. This is John Petsey talking about Microsoft going back to work, the expanding cannabis legalization and what that means to CRE investors, and $28 billion of potential retail that we can all go and buy. This is interesting from Mark about green leases. I'm sure we'll talk about this. Roger talking about what's going on in Asia Pacific, getting ready for work. This caught my eye. This is almost like sort of next week's topic, digital twin, but here there's a sort of a mention of renewables. That's actually a quote from Dan Isaacs, who will actually be our guest next week. And also a video there. And Gina, I'll get you to sort of expand on this. And just as a reminder, we'll talk about digital twin next week and next month, or the whole month of April. So with that, who wants to start? John, you wanna?
Happy to, yeah. So, the notes I collected there are really just to try to track and figure out, what's happening with our market and intelligent buildings, kind of like your opening comment, right? We came together. And what do we see? We continue to see conflicting messages. Microsoft sent, they have a plan, everybody's going back to work. At the same time, it looks like there's huge amounts of real estate assets that have been devastated in retail and have been held off the market through refinancing, restructuring, delays, mortgage forbearance, whatever. They're probably going to come home to roost sometime. On the other side, interesting market segment, of course, is, with cannabis legalization, indoor agriculture is big, and it's having an impact on commercial real estate because you need buildings, and it's like another use for specialized industrial warehouse facilities. So just different data points about where this whole market's going.
Great. Mark, tell us about green leases. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, or?
I think it's a really good thing, to be perfectly honest with you. This really caught my eye this week. So basically what we're talking about here is commercial real estate owners are increasing this whole concept of green leases. It's basically a way to structure lease language to both their benefit as well as the tenants, to help recap, or I shouldn't say recap, reap the benefits of sustainable building improvements. It's basically a shared expense. And I think this is, we're going to start seeing a lot more of these going forward, especially as the whole E2, the economic social governance, E2G movement, which I've said, these last show or two, that seems to be increasing. And, it's a way to save money, increase comfort and sustainability, credibility for both the owner and the tenants, and the occupants. And so I think we should all be on the lookout for these.
The reason I asked whether it's good or bad is whether it sort of smells of greenwashing. That was kind of behind it. Yeah.
I'm curious, Mark. We hear Jim Lee talk a lot about the old financial models and how that holds us back and so forth. Are you viewing this as some sort of new financial model potentially that would just give some more flexibility for new technology and all that?
Well, I think maybe not so much new technology, but technology for sure for all of us in this industry. But I don't look at it as a new financial model or whatever. It's just another way to, bring on sustainability efforts and things like that. And not one group, one person is bearing the burden. It's a way to share the responsibility, share everything. And I think part of this, which is not included in this particular article that I shared with everybody today, is the tax incentives and things like that, the programs that are available that will allow more people to take advantage of those.
Thanks.
And Roger.
Yeah, a couple of things there, really. One, but they're both kind of good news, if you like, because you see Asia Pacific, the leasing market sentiment is really in every market there taken upturn. Bear in mind, they're kind of ahead of the curve with us with COVID. But you see Singapore, Australia, India, Korea, mainland China, Hong Kong, every single market there is on the rise now, which is good news. And with the bottom article was really about sort of people gambling on what the outcome may be. Your Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and co, and Disney and Netflix, Morgan Stanley, they're all kind of gambling that not next year, maybe, but maybe the year after, it's going to come back. So they're actually sort of gambling almost a little bit on taking up real estate, and they're all doing it now. So it's kind of good news, which means they're investing in or they're hanging in there. And I think whilst we've seen a lot of downturn, we talked about it last week with the retail headquarters and banks cutting down, there is a balance there, but it looks like the tech guys and some of the bigger, more forward-thinking companies there are actually beginning to gamble on saying, hey, you know what? It's not a bet. It's kind of, the phrase is about you saying there, this is not a bet, this is a certainty that it's going to come back. So positive stuff.
That's great. Certainty is a great word.
Yeah, I like it.
And Gina.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So on one of our numerous conversations, I brought up what was the impact of COVID to actual design, building design? Will we see any differences there? And not necessarily just COVID, but things like the impact of, Amazon to some of our, retails, malls, things like that. So I just found it interesting. I thought this link on Taco Bell, and it talks about its new design for newer locations. And they're going to be smaller. So Taco Bells are going to be smaller. It's going to be more drive up. It's going to be more curbside. And so I just thought it was pretty interesting. And it'll be interesting to see if other locations of other types of buildings have a different design in the wake of COVID, right? I think it makes sense for a lot of the retails to go smaller footprint. I think we'll see that also in office buildings. There'll be smaller footprints as well. The other part of the slide is just, I was going through and I was looking for information on the history of sustainability and the reporting, the history of the reporting. And in the US, a lot of it started around 1970 when we started doing sustainability reporting. And then I just thought these were useful statistics because it was actually higher than what I thought as far as the reporting. And specifically, the percentage that thought, that they wanted to see those types of reports, tenants or occupants or customers, whoever wanted that. So I just added that in there. So it's a good I don't know, it's a good thing to know. And then the link below that was actually, you could go there and you could see the sustainability reports of companies. And so anyone that's kind of doing a little bit of research, I thought that was interesting to see what they thought was sustainability and what they were doing, what their plans are. So that's it.
That's great. I'm sure we'll get deeply into that in our conversation. Anybody else that didn't put up a slide that wanted to chime in at this point? General stuff? I guess that's a no. So let us turn to sustainability. I'm going to bring in Casey and Mark. Could you do a bit of an intro?
You bet.
Okay, where are you? There you go. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm delighted to welcome Casey Talon to today's Monday Live. Casey's been a good friend of mine for many years. We have had many of cocktails to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly in this business. And she brings over a dozen years of experience in many capacities as an industry analyst, as a consultant, working at the true intersection of technology, policy, economics, and our subject today, sustainability. Without a doubt, she's one of the most passionate persons I know when you talk about sustainability and climate change, and she'll get you straight for sure. She's got a deep understanding of the technologies that are involved in digital transformation and sustainability transformation. She's currently at Switch. Prior to that, she was one of the principal research analysts at Guidehouse and Navigant, and prior to that, Nextant and IDC. So Casey, welcome to Monday Live.
Thank you. Really excited to be here.
Great. So I'm going to start it off, and again, we're about open questions and stuff. So I've got a couple questions to kick us off. So as of today, where do you see sustainability in the building environment? Give us your perspective.
I think it's become fascinating how mainstream the conversation is, that it kind of, regardless of where you sort of sit in the landscape, it's a topic. So you hear major investors talking about it, demanding, transparency and disclosure of climate risk. You see it as a pressure from consumers and kind of, I think, the interplay of the idea of sustainability becoming really deeply embedded in how you define a brand of an organization and kind of across industries. And so I think that is a positive thing if you're coming at it as an advocate for more sustainable buildings and tackling kind of big challenges like climate change.
How over the years you've been involved with this and covering it and writing about it and pushing this forward, how has it changed? What has been the changes that really continues to push sustainability forward, I guess?
I mean, I think from my perspective, the benefit of technology is that you can deliver big improvements in sustainability that also deliver bottom line benefits. So where it could be polarizing, particularly in the US around climate, you can institute changes in building operations to be more sustainable. And that has all of these other ramifications that are business positive, right? So your experience is better, your occupants are happier, you're more efficient, you're more your performance is better. So there's multiple benefits underlying the initiative that is also driving sustainability. So I think that's a really positive thing, and that I think is tied very much to technology and technology becoming more cost effective and just utilized more broadly.
So there's a monetizing effect that sustainability can deliver. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so.
How about, one of the things when we organized Monday Live back in the day, it was COVID, and now we're kind of, spreading our wings a little bit while COVID is still important. How has COVID really had an effect on sustainability in your eyes?
Well, I think that a lot of people will talk about COVID accelerating trends that were already underway. I mean, we've talked about digital transformation forever. We've talked about, resilience forever. I think in a lot of ways, COVID is sort of this canary in the coal mine when you think about disruption and uncertainty. A lot of people talk about like disruption is the only new normal. Climate change will continue to unfold, potential huge disruption at a regional level or at a global scale. And so we've just had over 12 months of that is a really harsh reality, and kind of global pause. And so I think in a lot of ways it's just accelerated trends. And I think, I mean, Gina, to your point about even design parameters changing, I don't think this is something we're going to just go back to what we did before. I don't think that once the vaccine rollout happens, we're going to say, okay, everybody go back to the office. I think this is fundamentally change the way we experience the built environment. And I don't think that's going to change. And it's just accelerating some of the things that we've talked about for a long time.
One of the things that our group, we've talked about, during some of these sessions and stuff is energy. And, I think people equate energy with sustainability, sustainability with energy. And I think that kind of used to be part of the discussion. Have you seen a change in the energy conversations as it relates to sustainability, going on now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think the interrelationships between these elements of this conversation are undeniable. So from an energy perspective, I think resilience is a big deal. So how do you incorporate cleaner energy, but also energy that is reliable and resilient as we have these disruptions? Do we have the right mix of power? Obviously, we just saw what happened in Texas. How do you overcome those kinds of challenges? And so I think the energy conversation will continue to evolve as well. But I think that whole industry is going through a massive transformation, evolution. So I think becoming more democratized, right? Like it's no longer going to be this central fossil fuel generated infrastructure going forward. And that changes the game for, how does energy play into your real estate portfolio?
If the rest of the panel, please ask, but here's a question for two is one of the things I've noticed that seems to be more part of the conversation now with respect to sustainability. We've talked about energy, we've talked about CO2, et cetera, is water. Are you seeing water now is becoming more or less of the discussion? And how is the water side of this either influencing sustainability or not influencing it?
I think it's going to become a huge issue. It's coming, right? I mean, I think that's sort of the next major area of risk for a lot of geographies in particular. But I think there's also something underlying when you think of like ESG historically. I think this relationship between those metrics are becoming more blurred. I mean, I think 2020 created a whole eye-opening experience beyond COVID, right? We've never, the amount of conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, like these conversations have evolved in such a dramatic way, become, dinner table conversations for people that maybe hadn't paid attention in the past. And I bring that up because I think equity and environmental justice is going to become an increasingly important part of this conversation. And that's a huge issue when you think about water.
How about the whole concept of ESG? I think we all know what it is. And that seems to be right now the talk of the day, looking at industry news and things like that. And how do you see it? Do you think this is something that's going to be sustainable, not sustainable? Is it the flavor of the day kind of thinking, or what's your thoughts?
I don't think it's going anywhere. I think when you start to have major investors utilizing those kinds of lenses on how they're evaluating, risk and valuation of different kinds of assets, I mean, I think that's pretty game changing. And I think, it's an element of brand, and it's ultimately, if it's also sort of like, what's the expectation of the future workforce? How are you going to be able to attract and retain employees? Like the next generation, I would argue, really sees this as a lens on how they're going to evaluate where they work, where they shop, what they buy. So I don't think it's going anywhere, how they invest.
As a marketing guy, I find it very interesting in the series of questions that I've asked you. You've mentioned brand twice. and which is, as a marketing guy, that's great. I love it. But it's interesting how I think that's a whole underlying piece of this whole sustainability ESG piece, that the technology is there, but people need to be thinking more along the lines about the business side of this, not just the technology side. And the brand, or a company's brand, is extremely, extremely important today. So interesting that you brought that up.
I think to your point too, so maybe as Bill said something about greenwashing. I mean, I think a really critical element of this is the transparency piece and the reporting piece. So, you know, it is an element of brand, but that, you know, is there a level of transparency to understand that is actually impactful change? It's not just sort of checking a box. So that's still an issue I think that we'll all have to grapple with.
So, Casey, great to have you here. We're all tech people. I think we're into the sort of the data side of technology in buildings. I think you know that. And you'd mentioned technology as part of the sort of sustainability, trying to solve the sustainability issue. Can you be a bit more specific, especially around sort of data and analytics and sort of the use of data to help the sustainability issue? How should we be thinking about that? What are the sort of the promising ways to think about that, and what is a waste of time, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think data is critical because you have to have some sort of benchmark. Are you actually making progress toward these targets? You hear really impressive, sort of eye-catching goals from these major companies saying we're going to be carbon neutral by this date. We're going to, you know, evaluate and establish a science-based target where we're going to reduce our emissions to support, you know, climate initiatives. So all these big proclamations, but then how do you actually get there? And I think data is critical because for a long time, I think you could just sort of offset everything. You could just buy renewable credits and say, look, I'm supporting a solar farm. I'm, buying wind, whatever. But I think increasingly it's going to have to come inside the walls of your operations. And so you have to know where you're starting from and then be able to track how improvement happens over time. And so what are the actual impacts from, through the carbon lens, at least, on these different elements. So I think that's why data is so critical. And I think it increasingly more robust and granular data becomes really important for your day-to-day operations as you start to tackle things. And the most cost-effective element of energy efficiency, right? So how do you make sure you're actually deploying those resources?
I wanted to throw out a question. Hey, Casey, John, Patsy.
Hey.
Yeah, hi. You know, especially given your role in other positions with consulting firms and advisory and stuff, what are the objections when you talk to, you know, owners and operators, why they might not be interested or don't get or don't believe in investing in sustainability?
I think a lot of people just think it's not broken. Why am I going to fix it? Like, why change what I've done forever? I know how my building operates. I've got all this institutional knowledge. I have a team of people who have run these buildings and run these systems forever. How are you possibly going to come in with some kind of data and tell me something different? And so I think just proving that these are strategies to be more effective at what you utilizing the staff that you have. And I think also recognizing that we're, I think, at a point in time where there's an entire generation of folks that will be retiring, institutional knowledge leaving. And so how do you evolve the way in which we deal with buildings? So recognizing that, I mean, it's a buzzword people say, but like, are you really future-proofing your real estate? I know that's kind of a loaded statement, but I do think it's about, you know, thinking into the longer term and recognizing, you know, the cross-cutting benefits of utilizing data.
Okay, so hi, Roger Woodward. It's if you're the good, by the way, that leaves Mark as the bad or the ugly. I'll leave you to choose which one of those is. But you know, kind of, we talked for a long time about the fact that previously people have always paid lip service to energy. Now it's actually got a green kind of label hanging in there to give it more sustainability. Do you think really it's going to need a generational change with the baby boomers sort of moving on to have people start thinking who actually is more in their DNA than perhaps it has done for an older generation?
I don't don't know. I mean, I think, if you think about really senior level executive leadership right now, I mean, the bottom line benefits of some of these technologies and in making these investments should resonate with, I don't think that's necessarily just a sustainability lens, right? So I think maybe it will accelerate as the new leadership comes in or over time, but I don't think so. I think there's enough kind of financial and business benefits that should resonate, and just as the conversation becomes more mainstream, if your investors are sort of demanding it, I think the conversation is just elevated a little bit.
And you think there will be more upward pressure within the companies from the people anyway to actually make sure that people are taking it seriously.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of, I mean, at least in the building space, the one I've probably had this conversation with a number of you, but this sort of idea that there's this bottom up and top down pressure. We talked about the bottom up, like what the next generation thinks, but I think in a lot of cases, there's some executive who recognizes I like the idea of digital transformation, I like the idea, the headlines that come with sustainability. And so it's sort of this like squish of the middle, like the folks that are on the ground day to day running buildings, how do they address these pretty big challenges and kind of demand for a shift in the way they've always done things. And I think that might be where there's like a point of friction too. That's something to manage. That's a huge change. I mean, I'll never forget, I had an interview for a project a number of years ago, and I was interviewing a bunch of folks that were coming into new roles. This woman's role, the title was, I think it was digital innovation, as for a major research university in the South. And she talked about coming in and sort of being charged with making a smart building strategy. And this very point came to, she's like, look, I have a leader in my facilities organization. The number one thing he says to me is like, I chose this job to be not behind a computer. So I think there's a process of change management in terms of, helping people realize this may make your job better, but there's also a bunch of folks who don't want that change. So how do you kind of grapple with that piece of it? I think is a interesting challenge.
Hey, Casey, this is Arno. Back to that, how much impact do you think that social media is having on building owners as far as feedback from their tenants, their occupied space, that's changed since our generation, in fact? Is there an impact? Do they care? Do they monitor that? Or is that a so what?
That's really interesting. I don't know. I mean, I think it's an interesting channel for customer feedback, right? Like I had a horrible experience at this fast food joint. Give me some free food. I think that that sort of happens. So does it trickle down to I'm miserable in this office that I'm renting because I'm constantly hot or cold? Like, that may be a thing. I'm not sure that is the most powerful pathway right now. But I haven't really honestly thought too much about the social media realm of it, except just that I think the information overload we all have all the time, things can, I think there's a broader set of pathways to get your word out there, and the marketers in the world may be watching those streams to be able to manage that potential stream of frustration or feedback.
Yeah, I was wondering not just on direct feedback too, but are they monitoring it from the current perspectives of energy, sustainability? Is it a thing with the people that we, so not only on the complaint side, which I think is a valid piece, but also on the, is this important to my tenants, occupiers?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of conversation in social media around, sustainability performance or, investments. I think that it's happening. I think there's a volume of conversation out there. I don't know if anyone else has thought about that particular angle, but.
So I was actually going to ask, how will we know that we're done, as it were, with sustainability? I know that's a really stupid question. And Eric asked it, I think, in a much nicer way. What KPI is important for us in buildings to see that we're actually making progress on this? Is there, how do we measure progress in the next few years that we're doing the right things as an industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of conversation around transparency and reporting. So do we have the next generation of rating systems? There's a lot out there, obviously. You know, is there a standard, right? Is it become more standardized? I think that might be a question as well. I mean, I don't know. Is it something that you're done with, or has it just become another metric of performance that is the same as your measurement of NOI in a real estate portfolio? Like, does it just become standardized metric that you're just constantly tracking, and it's just part of the ongoing evaluation?
So Stephen has sort of dug in a little bit more on that question. Which top 3 metrics would you say that each primary stakeholder, meaning ESG, investors, building operators, and policymakers and communities agree? What do they agree on in terms of a metric? I think that's how he was asking it.
Like, as in terms of goal setting?
What metrics can people agree on as being something that's really sort of easy to measure and can actually show us progress? I think that's maybe another way of putting it.
I mean, I think carbon reductions,
Right. That's the obvious
energy efficiency metrics, water waste, in you know, absolute or relative terms, are probably kind of where there's enough rigor around evaluating those metrics.
So would you agree that there's both hard KPIs and soft KPIs? To your point, carbon, or I say X and energy consumption, whatever, and then those soft is, you know, did it, as a building owner and operator, did I keep my tenants in my buildings a lot longer? Did I maximize their lifetime value because I undertook sustainability initiatives in some way, shape, or form? And then on the, especially for a public company, being able to put that in your stockholder, in your annual reports and stockholders, that's what a lot of shareholders look for. So do you see any difference between the soft metrics and the hard metrics?
That's a good point. I mean, I think where the most impact is if you are measuring, right? Even the social elements, do you have a number of hours that you've dedicated to this element of social justice or social, you know, social giving, or whatever metrics you're looking at? So I think if you're tracking it and you have some quantifiable measure of what you've done, it's eliminating that greenwashing or reducing the greenwashing risk. So I think the KPIs are critical for sure.
So
Casey, I'm sorry, Steve, sorry. So Casey, to follow up on what Mark said, do you think that we're going to see, or are we seeing the value of a building based on its sustainability? So if you go to sell a building, are you seeing maybe there's a higher value attached to that? Or on the flip side, you know, people that work or own buildings, are they seeing something positive reflected in their insurance premiums? You know, so are you seeing that as a metric right now?
I think it completely depends on where you are. Geographically, it matters probably what sector you're in as well. So, and what size building. I think that there's, I think there's always these stories of you know, 2 twin Class A buildings. If they have investment in, you know, additional technology and sustainability, it should sell at a higher rate. But I think the operating impact, I mean, I think those numbers are important. It can show this building operates at a lower cost. That should differentiate for selling that building. I think you see it in some sort of premium residential sectors, but I don't think it's mainstream yet, unfortunately. And I think it definitely varies by geography. I mean, I think it makes not even, you know, like US versus European countries, but even within the US. I mean, Gina, we've talked about this, the conversation I may have with someone if I'm in California or even Colorado versus someone in maybe the Southeast, it's going to be quite different today.
So my question to Casey, this is Steve Fay. We've had a lot of conversations around what sustainability is, and recently we've been starting to talk about digital twins. And you know, when you try to put metrics around energy, every building is different. They're all designed uniquely. So what would be, and I don't know that this is happening, or maybe it's something, my question to you is, has there been any willingness or effort on the part of the designers of the building at the time when they produce the design, that they actually with it establish what the expected utilities will be for that facility? So forgetting the occupants, because that's, you can't control that, but the base load of the building to heat it and cool it and run it, essentially, they should be able to forecast for a given utility rate what the amount of consumption, well, forget the dollars, just what the consumption load will be for the various utilities just to keep the building operational. That would then give building owners the ability to go and say, hey, it was forecasted, the design consumption was X. We've actually made improvements. It's X minus 10% or 20%. We've actually improved over what it is. But have you seen anything to that around those kinds of conversations, or any effort by designers to calculate what the expected utility requirements would be?
I mean, I think it's possible, and I think it's an increasing conversation. I think historically the challenge was that where the handoff was, and kind of where folks cared about that were down the line when they were operating those buildings. And so that disconnect, I think, was always a hurdle. I think it's increasingly part of the conversation. I mean, you even look at some of the major AEC firms out there, the design firms that are starting to have these sort of like innovation hubs and digital groups where they're starting to incorporate a lot of this modeling, because I think there is an increasing understanding that the folks that want to build that building are now aware they should be asking for those things.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think
it would make a huge difference to have a starting, a baseline that everybody could work off against, because otherwise we're just making the stuff up. I mean, obviously, because there's no calculation of forecast of what it should have been to begin with. But second question on sustainability, the definition. All buildings, all of us as homeowners, we all produce a certain amount of waste, physical hard waste. Is that come up in conversation? Is that expanded? The definition of sustainability is include the amount of waste products we send out every day?
Yeah, I think waste is important. I think there's folks that are measuring, and trying to have initiatives where they even say, like, floor by floor, what's the volume of waste going out of a commercial building? I think an element of waste that's fascinating that I don't know that there's enough conversation around is e-waste. So, as we become everything digital, the sort of element of that waste, I think, is a really huge challenge that's coming down the pike that we should all be talking about. But I think in terms of volume of waste, you see a lot of initiatives where people want to be zero waste. They want to make sure they're, having composting and recycling. And I think that's become pretty common and mainstream. But I think it's important. Hand in hand with water.
So to Steve, you and Casey talked a few minutes ago. Do you both talk, do you think we should have sustainability standards? To your point, Steve, these are the things that everybody is going to measure or whatever? Because you were trying, Steve, you were trying to talk that or say that the the measurement, that if everybody is following a certain, I guess I got from it, a certain standard for their sustainability initiatives, would that answer what you asked?
What I'm saying is every building needs to have a baseline standard,
right? Okay,
and it has to be uniquely calculated. And so I see an opportunity for the existing building inventory to go in and have engineering firms calculate what that number should be. Okay. And then for any new building coming out of the ground, that should be one of the requirements, that the engineering firms calculate what the base load energy is expected to be. Then you have something to measure against that everybody can look to and say, okay, is it better or worse than what was forecasted? And if it's worse, you're not doing your job, right? Why are you wasting money? But it's to hold people accountable for a performance when they don't even know what good looks like. I'm not sure how you do that.
Well, I think that issue of accountability is becoming top of mind. I think it was just maybe last week there was some conversation around tying ESG performance metrics to executives' actual payouts, right? Like their annual bonus now a line item on the indicator of their bonus can be increasingly
Yeah.
ESG performance. And so that, I mean, that there's serious accountability.
Therese just mentioned CBEX, and I don't know what that is. Do you know what that is? Can you explain that? Does
Yeah,
that
so
does that help
Department of
in
Energy
what?
has long run this commercial building energy consumption survey. And so it benchmarks performance of classes of buildings by size, age, and then sort of just this representative survey. The only big challenge with it is it's really old. It's always quite behind. So it hasn't had funding. It's behind, but it's a great sort of starting point data set for sure for the U.S. specifically. And they have it for residential and for manufacturing as well. And I think it's a data set that many people use as sort of the baseline for evaluating some of these conversations, but it can be behind. Well, a lot of the building stock is here and it hasn't changed, but accounting for the retrofits and the upgrades and technology that may have happened in the last 5 to 10 years, there's a bit of a gap.
Where is LEED these days? I mean, it's obviously still there, and we heard from, I think Jim Young mentioned that it matters to owners from a property valuation perspective. Where is that movement right now?
Yeah, I mean, you've got LEED, I think there's a lot of buzz right now around WELL, which, sort of an analog of transparency around the WELL building standards. There's other dimensions, and I think, I think it's important. I think, and I think one of the evolutions for LEED, and I'm not an expert, maybe even others may have thought on LEED specifically, but, becoming increasingly dynamic. So you couldn't say, Steve, to your point of this is what we're expecting, this building is built to this standard, but then once it's operated, if all of those, design guidelines on operational expectations are overrun, you're not actually a LEED gold platinum building. And so having it more dynamic, I think that's evolved. I'm not totally up to date with the most current on that, but I think that those kinds of initiatives are valuable. I mean, I think that you're seeing right now the current focus on WELL, and ultimately these metrics are, again, interrelated, right? If the idea of a healthy building is also a productive building, and so there's financial benefits of that too. I don't know if others have thoughts on the current LEED. I'm not totally up to date on some of it.
So I wanted to give an opportunity to Bill to do a bit of a sort of a recap on the last few weeks and maybe the comments that you've heard from Casey today. And then because this is kind of the end of the month, we kind of wanted to sort of try and wrap it up in terms of the conversation, and then we'll dig in a little deeper. Bill?
Yep.
I can bring up your slide if you want.
Yep. Casey, thanks for that. That was really interesting information. My big takeaway is the squish in the middle. I like that one. That was good. The pressure from above and below. And it's funny, we're all playing in the middle, and that's where the squish is, which is probably where the least action happens. So really well said. So thank you. So as we wrap up March with Casey, who put an exclamation point on this 5-week conversation on sustainability, I'll do a quick recap so we can bring it to a close and move on to our next month, which is the digital twin. So we started off the month, seems like forever ago. We were in winter, it was Texas. Remember that whole mess 5 weeks ago? That was when we had Doug Hausman speaking about the grid for sustainability. Really, the question was, can we have a reliable grid for sustainability? And the answer was, maybe. It's too soon to tell. So we want to thank Doug for being there. A week later, we had a conversation about, can we have smart buildings in a sustainable world? And is the desire to drive sustainability window dressing, or is there a real value in it? I mean, Casey touched on a little bit today. Do you have big companies doing this for their 10Ks and 10Qs and their annual reports, or is there some value in there? And I think the answer is it's both, and it really depends on what your point of view is. So middle of the month, we brought in Phil Bain from the Smart Cities Council. A couple takeaways. The main takeaway I liked from that was his definition of sustainability, you probably all heard it before, but I liked his definition, which is, are we taking from the future to build the present? Super simple, interesting way to look at it. The question that week was, can intelligent design concepts create sustainability? And the answer is maybe. So we're 3 for 3 on maybe. A week later, we brought in Jim Young from Realcomm. Interesting conversation for sure. The question that week was sustainability in commercial real estate. Is it a thing? The takeaway there, I think the answer was, well, for sure it was, it may be a thing, but there's so much to focus on right now before we get to that thing, with COVID, with downsizing, with getting customers back into buildings, with new floor plan concepts, and how we're differentiating the build space from the home space, and how are we going to get people out of their homes back into the buildings, and 5G, and so much stuff to work on before we get back to focusing on sustainability. I think, though, the good news from Jim was there's a new generation of people like Casey who are interested, and potentially even the current political situation is interested, which means there could be some additional funds available for that. So, and then of course, wrapping up with today with Casey. Casey, thanks a million. On the screen, these are 4 books that I've had a chance to read on the topic. Just for your information, I didn't actually read all 4 books. You should know that all 4 of these books are available on my favorite new app. That app is called Blinkist. You can literally read a book in 15 minutes. It's a Cliff Notes for any book available. So if you're interested, these are 4 books that speak to sustainability from different attack angles. I think Blinkist is under $100 a year, and heck, I could run to the store and read a book at the same time. So that's it for Anto, for my piece, for just putting a completion to this month's topic on sustainability.
So
That's
Bill,
great.
you can run and read at the same time. Man, my hat's off to you, pal.
No, this is
very good,
listen.
pal.
I can listen.
Anyway.
And please keep your hat off to me. Thank you.
I feel like I've been sniping here from the chat window, but I too kind of have a summary question for
Go
Casey.
for it.
And that is, like, I really admired all your work that you did at Navigant. I love to read your stuff. I also really liked everything Noah Goldstein did. And now Noah is at Google. And I feel like both of you are people that go where you feel they can do the most good. And I just wanted to ask, like with Noah at Google and the position he is, how do you see the position of these big tech companies, the Googles, Amazons, Microsofts, and what they're doing? What sort of impact do you foresee them having going forward on what everybody's doing?
I do keep in touch with Noah. I cannot speak at all to his current role. So I don't know. But I mean, in terms of those big companies, I mean, the tech companies, I think that they have to address the issue of sustainability because of the impact of these data centers. I mean, we are becoming a digital environment. The impact of these data centers is undeniable. So, they have to deal with it for themselves if they have these targets. But I think they also recognize that they're the infrastructure that they want to utilize to accelerate adoption of technologies, but they also don't have the domain expertise for buildings, right? So I think it has to be an ecosystem going forward to make any of these solutions really work. And there's different elements to bringing this together. And so I think they have a really important role to play, but not necessarily the answer for what's going to transform buildings, but certainly have a lot of influence and also can be great test cases, right? Like they can demonstrate the power of changing the way their offices are run or of how they report or how they do internal pricing or these different kind of levers you can use as an organization to tackle elements of sustainability.
Great.
It's interesting. I'm looking at the chat and we got a question from Ryan. If we wanted to further explore ESG as reference, what is the recommended path?
Who has the knowledge to answer that?
I know from my perspective, I'm just beginning that journey. So there's some interesting things I found, and I think Casey, you referenced it, that certain C-level folks are being included in their comp plan is the sustainability and how well did the company do and all that. Also, the fact that I mentioned this last week, that Moody's is now starting a rating service on how sustainable a organization is or whatnot. So that's kind of what I found thus far. And I think, for me, it's truly trying to define ESG and how it really relates to us and our technology, because I do believe we are a catalyst to enable building owners and operators, businesses for all that matter, to create a good ESG rating or an environment for them. So that's all I've got thus far on it.
I think there's to your point on some of the leadership. So if you see organizations that have established targets or most of the Fortune 100 for sure have sustainability reporting, so they'll have an annual ESG report. That's a really interesting way to sort of see how that's evolved over time as well. And there's some organizations that this is front and center what they do. I mean, there's industry associations, they do conferences and events that just watching even what those agenda topics are. Green Biz is one here that's been around forever, and their Verge annual conference is very much on that lens of sustainability. But I think those annual reports and some of those kind of media outlets are helpful.
So maybe other members of the panel here can sort of chime in terms of after concluding spending a whole month on sustainability. Do we feel good? Do we feel good that we're pointing in the right direction? John, Jim, you haven't said much today, and others. Scott?
I'll throw out a comment, John here. I don't think we made as much progress as I had thought or had hoped we were going to make around the subject. And I think part of that is because it is such a mushy subject, means different things to different people, embraces so many different things. Energy is a part of it. I think we come from that point of view, a lot of us. But it's a bigger definition than that. And that you definitely see that in the ESG discussion. And in a way, you can look at that, and that's why it's so hard to get owners to invest, right? It's a difficult subject that covers so many different things. Steve brought out the issue, how do you track results, which is, M&V engineers and commissioning agents and energy engineers. I mean, that's their business, is struggling with that. So that's my thought on it.
I just echo John's. I mean, it's a big subject, but I think Casey brought up a relevant point. Geographically, it's so dispersed, right? I mean, you're talking regional in the US, but even goes globally. The discussions people have globally. I know you guys operate in APAC, right, which has got a whole different mindset on it than we do even in the US. So, which is just another whole dimension of complexity that adds to the equation.
I'll make my usual comments about procurement. Sustainability is a process, whereas the sources of money for buildings are products or projects, which are capitally infused upfront. So unless we have some kind of change in the structure of the financial thinking, it's very hard for that money upfront to pay for a process for anything. It hasn't changed.
And back to Bill's summary, maybe. maybe we'll care, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll do something about it, maybe we won't. There's just a lot of ambiguity, it seems, depending on who you speak with, as to what measures are being measured and how do we actually create results that, again, can be measured, can be shared, and show results. And personally, I think we've just gone through a year's worth of a very large experiment. And at the end of the day, Wall Street is going to dictate people getting back into the building to produce results. That's my 2 cents on it.
I think also that the challenge is that it's all at the moment it's transitional. So, you know, everybody's thinking about what might happen, what could happen, but it's very difficult. We're guessing here. And it's not like we're coming from, yes, we might be coming, as you said earlier, coming from the energy side, we might know about that, but that wasn't largely successful in people picking that up. Whereas I do think that you know, we are in transition here where things are getting different labels now.
Scott, that's so interesting. It's like, okay, you got a year. You just got a year. Everybody we punted on a year. Now it's time to get back to work. And we'll see, and if like you suggest, Wall Street's going to lead the way, then Main Street will follow.
So I know a couple of minutes from the end is maybe not a good time to bring up the subject, but you mentioned climate change at the beginning of your conversation, Casey, and obviously sustainability and climate change are very related. But climate change, in a way, it's much bigger. How do you see the two sort of either morphing or the relationship? Is this the sort of the practice run for dealing with climate change, or is that a good way of putting it? Or
I think again, right now, there's a bit of a geographic lens on that. So the conversation, even within the United States, or the United States versus other geographic regions, is very different. But I think for by and large, if you look at sort of the Fortune 100, the way in which they're aligning metrics on climate and sustainability becoming increasingly interrelated and
right.
connected, science-based targets are becoming a very widespread thing, and that's 100% tied to climate change. So.
Okay. Any other sort of closing?
That's probably the perfect time to bring up climate change with 1 minute left.
Yeah, we can spend a whole month on that, maybe down the road. But any other sort of closing comments from anyone or from Casey before we wrap this up? We're a couple of minutes from the end.
No, thanks. I really appreciate being a part of it. It's a really fun conversation, and nice to see you all virtually. Great. At least.
It's nice. And I'll say, we don't always have to have an outcome on everything. Sometimes we can just have a conversation and see what comes from there. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, so with that, let us bring this to a close. We will put up the video of this by tomorrow morning, and next week we're going to start a conversation on digital twins, and that should be an interesting month. That's in April. So looking forward to that, and thank you, Casey, for joining us. Thanks for all of the panelists, and thanks for the attendees, and have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye all.
Thanks, Casey.
Thanks, Casey.
Thanks. Bye-bye.